We begin by praising Allah Azza wa Jal, Lord of the Alameen, which is mankind, jinn and everything that exists. And we bear witness that Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam is his slave and his messenger. My dear brothers in Islam, Allah Azza wa Jalla says in the Qur'an, بعد أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم يا أيها الذين آمنوا اتقوا الله حق تقاته ولا تموتن إلا وأنتم مسلمون. O you who believe, fear Allah, the fear that He deserves, and die not except in a state of Islam, which is absolute submission to Allah Azza wa Jal for all His laws and rules. My dear brothers in Islam, have we ever wondered, week in and week out, as we go to Salat al-Jum'ah, khutbah after khutbah after khutbah, يا أيها الذين آمنوا اتقوا الله حق تقاته, fear Allah, the fear that He deserves. Fear Allah, the fear that He deserves. Fear Allah, the fear that He deserves. Every other surah, every other ayah that mentions fearing Allah or being God conscious, which is taqwa, only says fear Allah, only says be God conscious. Yet this specific ayah mentions fear Allah, the fear that He deserves. Why is that? What did the scholars understand from this? Firstly, we all know the great saying of Imam Ali radiallahu anhu about taqwa. He said 4 things. Taqwa is 4 things. Al-khawfu min al-jalil, fear of Allah the greatest. Wal-amalu bit-tanzil, and applying the Qur'an, which was brought down to us. Al-khawfu min al-jalil, wal-amalu bit-tanzil, wal-rida bil-qalil, and being content with what little Allah Azza wa Jal has given us, not always wanting more. Wal-isti'dadu li-yawm al-rahil, and preparing for the day of departure, the day we will go back to Allah Azza wa Jal. You see, my dear brothers in Islam, everything in our lives, literally everything, comes down to taqwa. Because the Prophet ﷺ told us of a people, when he was giving the Sahaba in front of him, he's talking to the Sahaba themselves, the greatest nation, the greatest generation, Khairul Qurun. He's telling them there'll be people amongst you who will stand in front of Allah Azza wa Jal on the day of judgment with mountains of hasanat, like the mountain of Tuhama, so large, so great. Mountains of hasanat. Allah Azza wa Jal will make it haba'an manthura, nothing but powdered dust. All that work, all that effort, absolutely worthless, weightless, insignificant in front of Allah Azza wa Jal. So the companions told him, Ya Rasulullah, who are these people? Describe them to us. He said, they're from amongst you. Allahu Akbar. He said, they're amongst you, the greatest generation. They're from amongst you. They have the same actions as you. And they'd even have a portion of the night where they pray tahajjud just like you. Now the companions are freaking out. Allahu Akbar, what's going on? He said, but every single time they were alone, they indulged in what Allah had forbidden. Every time no one wasn't around, every time no one was watching, they sinned and disobeyed Allah Azza wa Jal. My dear brothers in Islam, everything comes down to taqwa. You can do whatever you want, but if you don't really fear Allah when no one is around, that's how you test yourself. Then look at the exact opposite, the exact comparison to that. إِنَّ الَّذِينَ يَخْشَوْنَ رَبَّهُمْ بِالْغَيْبِ لَهُمْ مَغْفِرَةٌ وَأَجْرٌ كَبِيرٌ. The exact opposite. Verily those who fear Allah when no one's around, when no one's around, they are the ones who have a great forgiveness and a great reward in the hereafter. My dear brothers in Islam, it all comes down to taqwa. Let me judge myself when I'm alone, when I'm home alone, when I'm on the phone by myself, when the family's out. What do I get up to? What do I do? If I don't indulge in sin, am I as God fearful and God conscious when no one's around as when there's someone around? See, we're all guilty of this to a certain degree. But we have to keep it in check. My dear brothers in Islam, what's going to save us on the Day of Judgment? When mankind will be running in despair, screaming, shouting, begging, not knowing where to run, where to hide, where to seek refuge. Everyone burning according to their deeds. Everyone burning according to their deeds. On this day, Allah Azza wa Jal, He'll give shade to certain people. One of them is a man who a beautiful woman approached him with status and wealth, and he said, I fear Allah. That's it. Allahu A'lam what he's done for the rest of his life. Just those 3 words, I fear Allah, guaranteed him shade on that day when there's no shade except Allah's shade. And the second person is a man who one day sat alone, no one around, and out of the fear of Allah he shed 1 tear. That's it, 1 tear. 1 tear shed out of the fear of Allah when no one was around. That guaranteed him shade on the day when there's no shade except Allah's shade. My dear brothers in Islam, through these ayat and the ahadith about fear of Allah and the reward and the forgiveness that is given to them, the scholars came up with a story that a man may come, a story, not a hadith. A man may come on the Day of Judgment with so many sins that Allah Azza wa Jal orders the angels to take him to hellfire. And as soon as the angels grab him to take him to hellfire, one eyelash comes forth and bears witness, Ya Allah, he shed 1 tear for your sake and it fell on me. So he's forgiven and he enters Jannah. My dear brothers in Islam, it all comes down to taqwa Allah, the fear of Allah. The scholars knew that wherever this tear this tear that dropped out of the fear of Allah, they knew wherever this teardrop fell, never would that place hit hellfire. Never will that place touch hellfire. Never will hellfire touch that place. So when they used to cry out of the fear of Allah, they used to grab it and wipe it around their body, so their body never touches hellfire. My dear brothers in Islam, the fear of Allah. Because Allah Azza wa Jalla at the end of the day, He guaranteed us 2 things. Fear and security. He will never give us 2 fears and He'll never give us 2 securities. It's going to be one by one. As for the one who lived in this life in fear of Allah, that is, staying away from the haram and applying what He ordered. He who lives in this life in fear of Allah, Allah on that day when everyone's running around naked and scared, He'll guarantee him security. But he who lives in this life in security, doing whatever he pleases, thinking no one's going to do anything to him, there's no punishment, there's no judgment, then Allah Azza wa Jal, on top of the horrors of the Day of Judgment, He'll make him fear Him. May Allah make us of those who receive the security, inshaAllah. My dear brothers in Islam, the Prophet ﷺ, to show us the importance, the absolute significance of the fear of Allah, tells us of a story of a man who sinned his entire life. He sinned his entire life. Nothing good did he do. And when he was about to die, he calls his kids and he tells them, I ask you for one thing. I gave you whatever you wanted in this world. Just do this one thing for me. When I die, burn me, grab my ashes and scatter them through the deserts, the oceans, the rivers, the seas, the forests. Make sure Allah never resurrects me, because if Allah were to bring me back together, I'm finished. My dear brothers in Islam, he committed kufr before he died. He committed kufr before he died. Not only did he sin his whole life, but he committed kufr before he died, saying that Allah couldn't resurrect him if he spread out his ashes. Yet when Allah Azza wa Jal, the one who created him nothing from the first time, when Allah resurrects him the second time, He asks him, why did you do this action? And he tells him, Ya Allah, it's only because of my fear for you. So Allah Azza wa Jal forgives him sins and enters him into Jannah. My dear brothers in Islam, it all comes down to the fear of Allah. You see, the descendant of Ali radiallahu anhu, the descendant of Ali, when he used to make wudu, he used to shake and tremble and shiver so much that whoever would see him, they would tell him, what are you doing? What's wrong? Why are you shaking? Why are you shivering? Why are you trembling? He said, how can I not shake and shiver and tremble? Don't you know who I'm going to stand in front of right now? He's making wudu, about to stand in front of Allah in salah. How can I not shake and tremble? At the time of the Prophet ﷺ, A man was literally called Shaheed al-Qur'an, because as he was praying behind Rasulullah ﷺ and he was reciting the verses of the Qur'an of the Day of Judgment, his heart split in two out of the fear of Allah. And he was made a martyr, a shaheed, straight to Jannah. No punishment, no question, because of his fear for Allah Azza wa Jal. My dear brothers in Islam, let me ask a question. We always say that the akhirah, the akhirah, the akhirah, the akhirah, the akhirah. Alright, let's put that aside for a second. I know this is a bit of a funny question, but I'm going to ask it anyway. Let's put the akhirah aside for a second. What's in it for me to fear Allah now? Now, in this dunya. It's not easy applying all the laws and staying all the way away from all the haram. And we always sin, we all of us fall into mistake. If I were to ask, what's in it for me to apply Allah's law now, to fear Allah now? My dear brothers in Islam, Allah Azza wa Jal just didn't put us reward in the akhirah, He also put it in the dunya. وَمَنْ يَتَّقِ اللَّهَ يَجْعَلْ لَهُ مَخْرَجًا وَيَرْزُقُهُ مِنْ حَيْثُ لَا يَحْتَسِبْ. He who fears Allah, Allah will guarantee for him a way out of every problem he can ever fall into in this world, and He'll give him provision from sources he never deemed imaginable. My dear brothers in Islam, Ibn Omar was walking through the desert one day, him and another companion, and they arrive at a shepherd, a slave, who was herding a flock of sheep for his master. Now they sit there to have dinner, and they call that man, they tell him, come and eat. That slave, and he says, I'm fasting. Subhanallah, Ibn Umar himself, the one who used to follow the sunnah of Rasulullah like no other, he said, on this long, hot day in the middle of summer, while herding someone else's sheep, you're fasting? He said, yes. So Umar let it go, and nightfall came. So he tells this man, he tells him, sell us one of your sheep. And the slave man replies, these sheep are for my master, they're not for me. So Ibn Umar, to test him, he says, where's your master now? He can't see us. Tell him, the wolf ate my sheep, and then you get the money. And no one knows the better of it. And that slave just did one action. He put up his finger to the sky and he said, Ain Allah? And where's Allah in this formula? If my master can't see me, can't Allah see me? Ibn Umar was so shocked. He was so amazed by this slave man fasting on this day and fearing Allah when no one was around, that he went back the whole way back to his city. He was saying, Ain Allah, and he was crying. Ain Allah, and he was crying. Ain Allah, he was crying. He did not stop until he reached the master of that slave. He bought the slave and he bought the sheep. He went and freed the slave and he gave him all the sheep. وَمَنْ يَتَّقِ اللَّهَ يَجْعَلْ لَهُ مَخْرَجًا وَيَرْزُقُهُ مِنْ حَيْثُ لَا يَحْتَسِبْ. He who fears Allah, Allah will guarantee him a way out of every calamity he could ever fall in, and will give him rizq from sources which he never imagined. I ask Allah Azza wa Jal to make us of those who truly fear Him in front of people and when we're alone behind closed doors. My dear brothers in Islam, the effects, the outcomes of taqwa Allah, of fearing Allah, are limitless. They're endless, both in the dunya and the akhirah. We all make mistakes. As long as we admit our mistakes and we turn back to Allah, that's taqwa itself. Because no one knows what I've done. When I turn back to Allah, when I seek forgiveness, when I repent back to Allah, when I pray those 2 rak'at, when no one's around, asking Allah to forgive me for the sin which I fell into, that's taqwa in itself. It doesn't mean just not to do any sins, but to acknowledge and immediately repent after we do a sin is taqwa within itself. My dear brothers in Islam, a companion was caught at the time of Rasulullah by the enemy. And this companion, his parents, lost their minds. They came running to Rasulullah, Ya Rasulullah, our son was caught. Gather the armies, gather the men, gather the weapons. Begin the march. They're probably torturing him. Rasulullah just asked a simple question, who is your son? They replied, my son is so and so. He basically said, don't worry about it. Now the parents are sitting there What do you mean, don't worry about it? They're probably skinning him alive. He goes, your son is of those who fear Allah. My dear brothers in Islam, his parents went home, crying all night, worried for their son, not knowing what to do, turning to Allah Azza wa Jal. Little did they know that that exact night, he slipped out of his chains and he made his way back to the city. On the way, as he was leaving the city of the captors, he finds their livestock. One narration says sheep and one narration says camels. All he did was make a few sounds, scare them, and they ran back all the way to his city with him. My dear brothers in Islam, his parents hear a knock on the door in the early morning. They open the door. Not only do they see their son right in front of them, but as far as the eye can see, the narration states, as far as the eye can see, they could see camels or sheep, livestock. He who fears Allah, Allah not only got him out of his calamity, but He gave him, the last thing that this man was thinking about when he's running away from his captors is, how am I going to make some money? Yet Allah Azza wa Jal, as he's running away, all of their livestock run away with him. وَمَنْ يَتَّقِ اللَّهَ يَجْعَلْ لَهُ مَخْرَجًا وَيَرْزُقُهُ مِنْ حَيْثُ لَا يَحْتَسِبُ. And we can see this through the companions of Rasulullah Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. We can see this through the ulama. We can see their life story. Abu Hanifa, I've mentioned his story many times, but let's pick on one tiny aspect right now. He was one of the greatest scholars to ever live, right? Very, very intelligent. Very, very intelligent. Yani subhanallah, can you imagine the Khalifa coming to him and telling him, I want you to be Qadi al-Qudat, the greatest status at that time, the judge of all the judges. Imam Abu Hanifa doesn't want to be the Qadi for this certain Khalifa because he's corrupt, because they might tell him or make him do something that's not right. So he doesn't want to take the job. This man was so intelligent that when that Qadi came up to him and told him, I want you to be the judge of judges, he said, I'm not the right man for the job. So the Khalifa tells him, you lie. He said, then I'm not the right man for the job. Very intelligent. Very intelligent. Imam Malik himself, when he met with him, when Imam Abu Hanifa left, Imam Malik was sweating profusely. And his students saw him. They go to him, Ya Imam, and what was Imam Abu Hanifa too much for you? He said, by Allah, I just sat with a man. If he wanted to convince you this pillar or this wall was gold, he'd be able to convince you. Like, where did this intelligence come from? How did he reach the peak of ilm? We all know Allah Azza wa Jalla says, وَاتَّقُوا اللَّهِ وَيُعَلِّمُكُمُ اللَّهِ. Fear Allah and Allah will teach you. My dear brothers in Islam, when he sat in his gathering, if he tried to reach a certain conclusion, an answer to a question, and he couldn't, he would remember a sin he done years ago. And he would know Allah's not giving him the answer to this question because of that sin, because he hasn't really forgiven him for it yet. So he would run home and cry and pray and beg Allah to forgive him, and he wouldn't come back until his face, the smile was from E to E. He would come back and he'll tell the companions or his students the answer, so happy, so excited that the students themselves, they said, Ya Imam, you're overdoing it. Are you that happy just because you got the answer? He said, no. Because I'm so happy because the only reason Allah gave me the answer is because He forgave me for that sin. The proof that Allah forgave me for that sin is He gave me the answer to this question. He reached the pinnacle of ilm, of his field, because of his taqwa Allah, because of his fear of Allah, because of his God consciousness. Yet even so, and even then, when he walked into the mosque one day and he heard the Imam reciting the surah Al-Qari'ah, the last two, Al-Zalzala, the last two, فَمَنْ يَعْمَلْ مِثْقَالَ ذَرَّةٍ خَيْرًا يَرَى وَمَنْ يَعْمَلْ مِثْقَالَ ذَرَّةٍ شَرًّا يَرَى. He who does an atom's weight of good, that day he will see it. And he who does an atom's weight of evil, that day he will see it. The man broke down after salah. This great Imam broke down after salah and continued to shake and cry, shake and cry, shake and cry, until someone came and tapped him on the shoulder. He turned around, he saw it was the man responsible for closing the mosque. He looked at him, he said, sorry, did I delay you from closing the mosque? He said, no, I just want to let you know we're about to make adhan for Fajr. This man, we would not be worth the hair on his chest. Yet look at how much he feared Allah and how much he was worried of facing Allah with the sins that he had done. His students narrate that never did we see our Imam make a mistake or say something wrong or do a sin in front of us. What was the result of his fear of Allah? 1400 years later, we still mention his name. 1400 years later, we're still giving him hasanat by talking about his stories and benefiting from his ilm. 1400 years later, he is still the most followed imam in the world. 1400 years later, you cannot go study Sharia except by mastering his field first, or going through his field first. My dear brothers in Islam, fear Allah, and Allah Azza wa Jal will bring you out of every calamity and give you rizq from ways you never deemed imaginable. See, Ibn Umar ibn al-Khattab radiallahu anhu, we know the stories, we don't have to mention them. Amazing stories, right? Amazing stories. Like Abu Bakr is going to go to Jannah first, ala rasi wa aini, but Umar's story is just something that no one can deny, no one can not connect to. Yet, in reality, all that strength, all that power, all that firmness on the truth, the companions themselves getting scared from him, all that is on one side of the scale, and the fact that he used to walk through the streets with 2 black lines down his face from how much he cried that night out of the fear of Allah is just something else altogether. The fact that he would stop a child, Umar ibn Khattab radiallahu anhu, who was guaranteed Jannah, would stop a child in the middle of the street and tell him, ask Allah to forgive Umar, because he knew the child's dua is mustajab. This massive mountain of a man, when someone said just 2 words, ittaqillah, he would drop to his knees. Literally, not metaphorically, he would literally drop to his knees. And when he died, being stabbed while praying Fajr, and his son came to put his head on the pillow, he screamed out, remove that pillow from under the head and put my head in the dirt. Maybe Allah will see my state and feel sorry for me and forgive me. Allahu Akbar. Allahu Akbar. Where do we stand? My dear brothers in Islam, that's why they reached the levels they reached. Umar al-Khattab, what was his result? The second man to ever enter Jannah after the prophets and messengers. The man who the Prophet ﷺ said that Islam will come to him and lift his hand and say, he upheld me. The man who the shaitan, when he walked down the road, when Umar walked down the road, the shaitan will take another road. The man who the Prophet ﷺ said, I entered with Abu Bakr and Umar. I left with Abu Bakr and Umar, and I'll be resurrected on the day of judgment with Abu Bakr and Umar. What a status. You see, one action out of the fear of Allah, you don't know where it ends up and we don't know where it takes you. You know the night journeys of Umar al-Khattab? Those night journeys where he used to go out and give all the day for the ummah, and at night go through and see whoever needs anything. Amazing stories. I don't want to talk about Umar right now, even though the story is about Umar. Let's talk about that girl that he heard on the wall. When Umar was walking, he got so tired, he leaned on the wall of a household and he heard a lady and her mother or her grandmother having a conversation. And that conversation was about the milk. How the mother was telling the daughter to mix water with milk so they can sell it for more. Make more. If only half is filled and the rest is water, you can make more milk and sell more. And Umar al-Khattab had not allowed this, had banned this. So that girl replied to her mother, I will not do something that Umar al-Khattab banned. So that lady said, where are we and Umar al-Khattab right now? Where is he to hear us now? SubhanAllah, she's saying that he's right there on the wall, leaning on the wall. Now that lady, that girl replied, I will not, if Umar al-Khattab does not see me, the Lord of Umar can see me, so I won't do it. That one statement, my dear brothers in Islam, that one statement caused Umar al-Khattab to get up, run home, bring his son and tell him, I found a girl for you to marry. That one statement, that girl feared Allah and made one statement, one word, that married her to the son of the Khalifa. And 2 generations down, their grandchild, their great-grandson was Umar ibn Abdul Aziz, the one who the scholars say is the 5th of the Khulafa al-Rashidin. SubhanAllah, he who fears Allah, Allah Azza wa Jalla will find him a way out of every calamity and give him rizq. Who knew their child 2, 3 generations? They probably didn't even meet him. They didn't know the child is going to be the reviver of the first generation. I ask Allah Azza wa Jal to make us of those who truly fear Allah, to fill our hearts with taqwa, bis-sirri wal-alan, while people are around and people are away and we're alone.
I wanna be in Jannah, Jannah, yeah. Jannah, Jannah. Every Muslim dreams to be up in Jannah, 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 Jannah. A pious person's destiny. Inshallah in Jannah, 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 Jannah.